Have you just got a green cheek conure or would like to learn a little bit more about how to look after them? Then this is the video for you. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. David here, and today we are doing an updated green cheek conure care guide. My old one was done quite some time ago and I felt it was time to do a much more concise and up-to-date version of it. Now don't forget to give this video a like, drop any interesting comments down below and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future interesting content about green cheek conures. Now green cheek conures tend to come from Central and South America and they tend to live in tropical and rainforest kind of climates. That means they're used to lots of heat, lots of water, lots of rain. They tend to spend most of their time up in the trees and canopy, although do sometimes go down to the floor to feed. Their primary diet consists of mostly nuts, fruits, both ripe and unripe, whatever they can get their little beaks on. It can even include insects and bugs because they're a very good source of protein for them. Conures, like most parrots, are a flock species and they live in large flocks together for protection and for companionship. You may see some videos of wild conures cuddling up in the trees together and it's very cute to see. Now that leads me neatly on to my next subsection, which is diet, and that's really important for any parrot, getting the diet right. Now you don't want to go for any extremes in diet. You don't want something that's all pelleted, you don't want all vegetables, you don't want all seed. You want a nice diverse diet filled with lots of natural lovely things. So for a conure, that would mean you have lots of fresh items, vegetables, and a little bit of fruit, because obviously in the wild they would eat some. You would have some sprouted items, soaked items such as nuts, and you'd also like to include maybe some fresh herbs and other bits and pieces. Generally as well, you'd want to provide some dried things. For example, seed is completely fine in moderation. You can provide some dried nuts, you can provide some dried herbs. Flowers are very good because they help manage hormones and they're quite interesting and fun to eat. They do eat some flowers in the wild too, so you can replicate that at home. And just generally have lots of things. So when we're talking about our green cheeks, for example, in the morning, they will get their fresh items. That will include vegetables, a little bit of fruit, because too much is no good. Some sprouted items, some soaked items, maybe some fresh herbs. And then in the afternoon, they'll get their dry stuff, which will leave in there to the next day, the next cycle, which will consist of some seeds, freeze-dried items, maybe some spices, some dried herbs, some flowers, and maybe a few nuts scattered in there as well. We would also provide them lots of foraging opportunities. So with these guys, you want them to be foraging, enjoying, interacting with their environment. So if they have some high value treats, for example, Scampi loves his walnuts, we will break them up and we'll hide them in foraging opportunities or in toys, so he has to find them and work for them rather than just getting it in his bowl. And that kind of stimulates a bit of the wild environment, because we feel foraging is very important. So if they're hidden in his toys, he has to go out and look for them. And I know at this point in the video you're probably saying, well, my conure doesn't want to do that, they don't know, they just ignore it. Sometimes you have to train them to do that, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Now just a couple of other notes on diet. I thought it would be helpful to give you a rough guideline of what portions you should be providing. So for a green cheek conure, they're a small bird, so the rule of thumb is 1 tablespoon per bird per meal. So for example with ours, we would provide them a tablespoon of fresh in the morning and then a tablespoon of dry later on to their other meal. Now this doesn't include foraging treats, and you can use it as a guideline only. So the most accurate way is to just keep a monitor of your bird's weight by weighing them regularly and adjusting the portion to make sure they're getting enough, because every parrot is an individual and some will eat more or less than others. Now the other thing relating to portioning is conures do love their fruit. They're very sweet beaked and it's okay to give them some, but you want to keep it in a reasonable portion size. So my best example is a grape. A grape to us is tiny, but to a conure that's the size of their head. So you can imagine that's quite a big portion for them. So if you were to provide a grape, it would be too much. So you'd want to cut it in half into small bits and space it throughout the day or use it for training treats. You can provide lower sugar fruits, for example, you can provide blueberries, raspberries, strawberries in slightly larger portions because they have lower sugar, but again, you want to monitor it quite closely. Let's talk a little bit about cage setup now. For your green cheek conure, you want a nice large cage space filled with fun things and lots of activities. We try to see our conures cages as bedrooms rather than cages, because it helps put us in the mindset of equipping it in a nice relaxed way where they want to spend time rather than just somewhere you dump them in when they're being noisy or when you need to go out. So what does this mean in actuality? What this means is loads of nice natural perches in there. So they have lots of sleeping options and lots of options to hop around, and it also helps to wear down their nails, so you don't have to do that as often. You want loads of foraging toys, you want a foraging tray or substrate on the base of the cage, you want nice high up bowls, you want to fill the whole cage with activities, including the bottom and middle, because they don't really need to just stay on the top. You can get them to explore everything. And you want lots of shreddable toys. These guys love using their beak, so you want loads of chewable toys made out of nice natural materials. These could be palm leaf, balsa, yucca, cardboard paper. You can make your own toys. It's all really good for them. Basically, you want them to be able to get that beak through the toy. If it's really hard wood for a green cheek, that may be too hard, it may be boring. You may also need to train them to use these toys initially, because they may not know, and that can sometimes take a bit of time, but it's well worth it. So that cage space needs to be lots and lots of fun, well sized, and have the appropriate bar spacing as well, so your conure doesn't end up putting their head through it. Generally, you want your conure to be quite keen to go in and out of the cage and be happy being in there if you have to go out to work or there's an emergency, rather than having to force them in there if you haven't done adequate training. One other thing we found very useful, especially for conures in their cages, is having something we call a peeking perch, and that's a perch attached to the door of their cage. We find this is very useful for getting them in and out, and also establishing an initial bond. So you will heavily reinforce this perch with treats, you will make it a training location, and then when they need to go in, they'll happily step onto it. You can reinforce them, close the door without any stress or having to catch them. You can also make it lots of fun for them while you're doing in-cage training there, because you can do targeting through the bars and all sorts of lovely activities. Just as a final point on cages, it's not directly related to cages, but it's kind of important. That bedroom should be a nice, good place for them to sleep, and your green cheek conure is going to need 12 hours of sleep. Now I know that surprises a lot of people because we need so much less, but these guys do need that amount of opportunity to sleep. In the wild, they'll be having naps constantly and resting. We need to simulate that in our home environment by giving them that opportunity. It helps simulate a natural light cycle, it helps keep them from getting grumpy, and it also prevents hormonal behaviour, because if they're getting less sleep, it can trick them into thinking it's breeding season, which means they get hormonal and potentially more aggressive. Let's talk a little bit about green cheek conure behaviour and traits, because a lot of people are very interested in it and also surprised by the way these guys act. Now, one of the most important things I feel for new owners, people really does not want to get on my shoulder. What do you want to do? Scamby does. Right, so anyway, let's continue. One of the most important things about these guys that people tend to overlook is they're incredibly overstimulated by loud noise and vibrations. If you are trying to do a training session with one of these guys and your washing machine's going off, there's a good chance you're going to get bitten. So you want to keep your interactions calm, you want to keep noise level quite down, especially initially until you've got some decent training in place. You can hear Pickles getting quite excited when I'm talking. Initially, when we first got these guys, they would nibble and beak while I was talking, so I'm talking quite loud so you can hear me. Through training, we've got it down to just a little bit of overexcitement and calm. So it can be worked on, but it's something very important to keep in mind. Now, a lot of people will tell you that green cheek conures are very quiet, maybe on an individual basis, but as a collective, no. Green cheek conures are not quiet. They can be exceptionally noisy, they can be very loud. The information on this is completely wrong, and I don't often say that, but it really is. They will be noisy sometimes, so you need to be prepared for that if you're a newer owner. If you've already got one, you're probably already well aware of it, unless you're very, very lucky. So do be prepared for a lot of noise and maybe reinforcing for calm to try and reduce it. Also, these guys love to beak, explore with their beak and bite. That means you're probably gonna get nipped and nibbled. This is something that can be worked on through training, but again, something else that needs to be prepared for. The two things that I find the most charming about green cheeks is how cuddly they are. Not all of them, because again, down to the individual basis, but they do love to cuddle up. It's something they do in the wild. They will cuddle up to your head and neck. They will like to be cuddled. So it's very important that you are doing so appropriately, petting them around the head and neck and only cuddling them to the sides, not grasping them. They're also very curious and cheeky. They will explore your entire home environment. They will get to places that they shouldn't. And that's a very charming trait if managed properly by providing opportunities where they can safely explore and have lots of fun. People often refer to them as clowns, and that's not quite wrong. They can be very naughty and very nosy, And as charming as that is, it can be quite difficult when you're trying to do work. So sometimes it's important to get some training done. Now, before I go into my training section, I do have lots of videos on conure behaviour and sounds. I'll link one now for you. I've got a whole playlist to explore because there is a lot to learn about them, and I'm always learning new things just by observing other people's, observing my own, and interacting with my conures. Now, as conures are a flock species, they are best kept in pairs or more because they will get the most out of having a friend, especially as they love to cuddle so much, interact so much in that way. If you do have a solo conure, there's nothing wrong with that, but you do have to put in extra work, extra effort, and make sure that they're going to be comfortable in getting all of that interaction they need. Parrots in general need lots of interaction. I would say conures need even more. It's also best not to forget that conures can be very sassy. Pickles is probably the sassiest little conure I have ever known. Out of all of our conures, she's incredibly sassy, which is also very charming, but it can lead to some nipping if you don't do training work. With your conure, it's important to do lots of training. Now, some people say that training isn't essential. I would say at least basic training is essential, because even if your conure or parrot's free roaming the house, or they're out lots, they have a bird room, aviary, you sometimes may need to do some essential husbandry, or you may need to get them back in a cage or take them to the vet, etc. So that's why I feel you should at least put target training in place for your conure. Now, target training involves getting your conure to touch the end of a stick gently with their beak in exchange for a reward. Now, this allows you to do lots of things. It allows you to redirect your conure from biting or beaking. It allows you to do something called soft targeting, where you're teaching your conure to interact with you softly with their beak by touching that stick, so they associate you with soft interactions. You can do the training through the bars of the cage with initial bonding. It's just very useful in all sorts of ways. We love to use it for directing our conures to points of interest, teaching them how to use things, and also fun tricks such as spin. It's very, very useful, and if you're new to parrots in general, I would highly recommend it. If you're not, I would still highly recommend it. It's just an essential skill, and it establishes a clear line of communication between you and your conure. Now, don't forget, with your training, you want to get that diet right so the treat motivation is high. So reserve a couple of those high value fruits maybe, or a seed they really like, and only use it for foraging and training. You'll have a lot more training success with your conures, and it'll be much easier for you to form an initial bond if you're on that stage too. Your conures will enjoy flying and foraging, so it's important to give them lots of exercise, so you can do some recall and station training. I've got a video on recall I'll leave a card for now. It's really useful to get them flying because conures can sometimes be a bit lazy and expect you to pick them up. So if you can get them exercising in that way, it's good for them and it's kind of fun, and once they get into the rhythm of it, they'll do it lots more. You also want to do descent training with a conure. Now, that could be just reinforcing them for calm when they're around scary objects. It could be just bringing things in that are a little bit different to their environment, or just changing their routine slightly, because we feel that some routine for parrots is useful, but too much is no good. So make sure you're changing things up, maybe some toy cage positions, etc., just to keep things fresh for them so they don't become scared of new things and worried about all sorts of stresses. People often ask about husbandry with their conures, and they're talking about sort of beak trimming, nail trimming. Beak trimming shouldn't really be essential, especially if they're exhibiting natural chewing behaviours and foraging, biting things. Nail trimming does occasionally have to be done with conures because they will get a bit longer. You can do it yourself voluntarily. Sophie, my partner, has a great video which I'll leave a card for now to explore that topic. Husbandry is essential, but it doesn't have to be stressful, especially if you train it properly, and that's again why training is so useful. So everyone, that brings me to the end of the video. I hope you found it useful. If you have a green cheek conure, if you have any tips you would like people to know, please leave them down below. I'd love to hear from you. But in the meantime, from me, Scampy, who's playing with Sophie and a cuddly Pickles, take care and see you later.